Okay, so first of all, spoilers. This is mainly, of course, for basically all of season 2 of Jujutsu Kaisen. So I have to admit, I wasn't too hyped when I first, got back into Jujutsu Kaisen because there was that few-year gap, and I only wanted to start watching it once I heard that the whole Gojo and Geto arc, the backstory arc, basically started to wrap up, and I couldn't fully watch it yet because I had to watch that one movie where Gojo beats up some random guy because he's black, and Maki starts dropping it down for a bunch of weebs. At least that's how I think Twitter describes it. After watching it, I kind of felt a little bit underwhelmed because I didn't find it that entertaining. I found it a little bit boring, actually, which is kind of ironic because the main character of that movie is now my favorite character in the entire series, but I digress. Okay, so the reason I'm even bringing up Jujutsu Kaisen 0 to begin with is because it kind of explains the reason for why I was a little bit underwhelmed as a whole for season 2, because again, I took a few years break, which I know that's probably the main reason why I was underwhelmed, because I couldn't connect with any of the characters or anything, because when I went to rewatch it, it was pretty exciting again. It was pretty cool. Season 1 through all this, season 2 was actually pretty cool watching. But after taking a long break and then watching a movie that was basically a bunch of exposition of a prequel, and then watching the first part of season 2, which is just a bunch of exposition of a prequel, it just felt like there was a lot of underwhelmingness for the entirety of me just getting back into the entire series. That is, of course, until we obviously reach the Shibuya incident. You are my special. Okay, so just in case you're one of those people who have no idea what I'm talking about and just don't care about spoilers, then let me just give you a little bit of a summary. So the Shibuya incident basically revolves around an entire plan that revolves around Geto, who basically crafts this entire plan to seal Gojo, the strongest sorcerer. But of course, because he's the strongest sorcerer, that plan isn't just an easy task. So there's a lot of planning that goes around this. First, on October 31st at 7 p.m., and then someone set up an entire curtain over the entirety of Shibuya. And basically that means that everyone's trapped inside this giant dome, and all these normal people just cannot exit until they basically call the name of one person that can possibly save them. They're basically forced to call the name of Gojo, who is essentially, the strongest sorcerer of the modern age. And when they call his name, he shows up, and he essentially is just ready to take out whoever is basically causing all this, because he's Gojo and he doesn't really need a plan. He knows it's a trap, but again, he is the strongest sorcerer of the modern age, so, who's gonna stop him? I really want to take some time to talk about this battle specifically. Gojo has to take down Jogo, Hanami, Choso, and eventually even Mahito. And this is the first time he ever actually takes a battle kind of seriously. This is the first time we see him actually get his hands dirty.
Man, honestly, I'm actually shocked. I'm saying I'm actually shocked you would ever have thought you could beat me with this loser shit.
They basically all have this plan to trap him in the underground subways with a bunch of innocent people so that he essentially cannot go out without hurting everyone. And to an extent, they are right about this plan. It does hinder him, but not by much, because he doesn't really care if there are casualties, as long as it's not by his own hands. Gojo is simply just a god amongst men. His value of human life is pretty low, and the only reason he even got serious in the battle is just because they kept underestimating him, which basically in a way was kind of hurting his pride. They thought they could manipulate him as if he was some normal mortal, but Gojo is anything but normal. His entire birth shook the entire world and put it on top of its own head. When they try to bargain and they try to basically trade their lives for the innocent lives of all the innocent bystanders, Gojo doesn't even bat an eye. He just goes and he just crushes Hanami, just leaving nothing but just dust and blood, because he genuinely does not care about anyone else other than himself, but just winning the battle. This is an insane wake-up call, not only to just the characters, but also even us, the viewers, that Gojo is not a human. He's a being that basically transcends nature, not only in just power, but also in mind and morality, which is an analysis that's not too dissimilar to someone else I'm going to be talking about in this video. So even though Hanami just fucking died, the cursed spirits still think they actually have a chance of beating Gojo. And it's all because they put him in a position to where he can't use his domain expansion, which is something that he could basically just kill all of them with in an instant if he actually could use it. But the thing is, since there's so many people around in such a small space, he would essentially pull all of them in, and they would all basically like turn into vegetables and die if they actually got caught in his domain expansion. And if he decided to just single out only the cursed spirits and basically push everyone out of the domain expansion, then it would just crush everyone against the domain expansion and the walls of the subway because it's such a small space. So again, they would all just die. And of course, even though Gojo doesn't care if there's a few lives that are lost, there's still like, he still has hearts. So he does have a limit to how many people he can watch die. So once Mahito comes in and pulls out a bunch of, like hundreds of freaking transfigured humans and starts like having them kill everyone, it turns into an entire slaughterhouse. And it was taking away way too many lives than Gojo was actually comfortable with seeing. They put him into a corner, leaving him with only one option. He puts everyone there under infinite void for just 0.2 of a second, which basically makes everyone who's normal there in a vegetable state, but it only puts them under a vegetable state for just only 2 months, and then they're able to return to society afterwards. And right after he did all of that, he went and basically ripped off the heads of like 1,000 transfigured humans in only like 299 seconds, basically cementing him as like one of the goats of Jujutsu Kaisen. And unfortunately, this is basically his peak for the entire season, because right after that moment, that's when Geto finally decides to show his face. This is a little jarring for Gojo because not only are they lovers, I mean best friends, but he also killed that man like a year ago. And as all the past memories start flooding in, it basically leaves him open enough, just long enough for the prison realm to catch him off guard and actually like trap him in its grasp. So as he's trapped, Geto finally basically starts to gloat about his whole victory, but the entire time, Gojo really isn't listening, because even though his 6 eyes are telling him that who he's looking at is Geto, his heart tells him that that's just not Geto, that's someone entirely different. And that's when the man before him finally reveals the truth. His real name is Kenjaku, and he's a curse user with the ability to switch bodies with anyone he basically wants. I guess as long as they're like dead or whatever. Sometimes we change our clothes around here, please do not get distracted by that. So Gojo's basically pissed off because his best friend is just letting Kenjaku have his way with him. He calls out his name and something completely unheard of happens. Geto's body actually starts fighting it back against Kenjaku, and he's amazed by this. Well, Kenjaku is amazed by this. Earlier within season 1, Mahito had an entire theory that the soul was made before the body because his ability specifically manipulates the soul and the body. So he basically thought that, well, since he has all this control over it and he sees all these mechanisms with it, he essentially just assumed that the soul was made before the body. But in this very moment, Kenjaku's experience with his own ability basically was telling the opposite. It was basically saying that the body and the soul were made at the same time, because there's no possible way, well, there's no possible other way for his body, for Geto's body to actually be able to have the memories flow into Kenjaku's brain and be able to actually attack him based off of these memories and have these feelings off of Gojo's words. And I think that's like all pretty interesting because I have the same ideals when it comes to reality. Everyone dictates their own world, what they let affect them, how they live their lives. And I think it works for the show too, because so many characters have so many strong resolves and beliefs that contradict other characters. And their resolves basically strengthen the individual character simply because of the fact that it's what they fully believe in. The entire Shibuya incident is just essentially a giant clash of everyone's ideologies, and the people with the strongest ideologies are the people who are left standing and left to make a giant impact on the rest of the world of Jujutsu Kaisen. But I digress. By the end of the scene, Gojo gets completely sealed within the prison realm, but luckily, because he has so much power, the entire prison realm gets a little too girthy for any one person to actually carry around. So since it's too heavy, they have to just wait there until they're ready to actually be able to pick it up and leave. Which means that the entire mission for our heroes basically turns from them having to save all the civilians in Shibuya to them having to save Gojo so that he can take down the enemy. And that basically leads everyone to go into their own individual battles, especially with Itadori, which ironically enough, he ends up going into the one person who wants him dead the absolute most in Shibuya right now.
Yuji, 弟の仇。
So back in season 1, Itadori and Nobara essentially went and killed some like cursed spirit fusions that were brothers. And like after they killed them, there was like this whole entire foreshadowing period where essentially the audience was told that their older brother was essentially going to come and get revenge for them. And this older brother's name was Choso. The thing that makes him different though is the fact that he's not only a curse, but he's also partially a human. And his entire motivation is simply just for his family. And it's actually pretty ironic because his entire power centers around blood, and the most important thing to him is his blood bonds, the blood that he has with his family, the bonds that he has with his family. And since Itadori basically killed his family, he's going to do everything in his power to take down Itadori. And the way that Itadori describes his brother's deaths is so calloused, because Choso essentially asks, like, hey, did my brothers have any final words before you killed them? And Itadori's just like, no, but they cried. Which of course is supposed to be a scene to show us that Itadori is really empathetic, because he didn't say it to be a dick. He was saying it because he himself was sad. He noticed that they cried when he took their lives, and he himself was outrageously sad about that. But Choso, of course, does not see it that way. He sees it as a taunt, and he's just ready to kill Itadori. So the fight starts, and basically Choso has this ability to shoot blood out of his hands at like supersonic speed, so it could basically just cut anything in half that it hits. Or at least I think it's supersonic speed. Power scalers, please don't go tweaking in the comments. I don't actually know. But only like the initial attack is actually like really fast, and afterwards it's pretty easy to dodge. So as long as Itadori is able to dodge the first attack, then he's pretty good. But Itadori can't really follow through with the entire battle, because in order for him to win, he needs to actually be able to get close to Choso, but he just constantly keeps failing at this task. So eventually, Mekamaru wakes up from his entire nap after this, just to conserve power, to actually give him a tip on how to beat him. And that entire plan involves them to go into the bathroom and break a bunch of pipes. And Choso knows that this is like a horrible idea to like actually follow him into the bathroom, because like there's just no reason for it. It's probably a trap. But Mekamaru starts talking a bunch of shit about like how he'll never be able to have any revenge for his brothers. And at this point, I had like so much respect for Choso, because usually when a character makes a really stupid decision in a show, I'm like, that's stupid, why is he doing it? But in this moment, I like the flawed fact that he's trying to restore his brother's honor, and that Mekamaru talking so much shit on his dead brothers is just like, it is what brings him to just go into a compromising situation. I just like that about the character. I think he's noble. I'm still rooting for him. So he goes into the bathroom and essentially sees that Itadori broke all the pipes, making all the water spray out everywhere, which causes his blood manipulation to essentially just stop working. Or at least it can only form for a couple of seconds before completely just losing its actual substance. And that essentially forces him to make him fight hand to hand against Itadori, which is exactly what Itadori wanted. This was the first fight within the entirety of the season that genuinely had me in awe. The fights with Gojo had its shocking moments, and watching Itadori and Megumi make the title Jump Kaisen live up to its name was satisfying, but this fight right here had me mesmerized. It was art, down to the colors, lighting, choreography. It was all just so beautiful. And the crazy thing is, this section of this fight wasn't even really that in-depth in the manga. Like, I swear, there was just a few panels of them throwing Dragon Ball Z styled punches, and the fight was kind of just over. But here, the animators decided to go all out with how they thought the scene should actually play out, and the anime is absolutely goated for that. It was at this point that I truly had been like sucked in and invested into the rest of this arc, not wanting to wait more than a day after a new episode dropped. But just because the show can take a W doesn't mean that Itadori can share the same fate. By the end of the battle, Itadori actually loses, and the only reason he isn't killed is because Choso basically gets these fake memories implanted into his mind that basically have Itadori sitting there with him and his family, which implies that him and Itadori are somehow related. So Choso kind of just has like a mental breakdown and just leaves, and just has Itadori just laying there passed out, just basically having his fate in the hands of anyone else who just comes across him, of any other curse users who basically find him. But we're gonna have to take a break from Itadori right now and focus on an entirely different beast that's wandering Shibuya right at this moment.
His fangs were constantly directed toward the strongest one.
So earlier in the arc, Ino is basically fighting these two cursed users, a grandmother and her grandson. And the grandmother basically has the ability to morph people's bodies into different people from the past or whatever. I guess it's never like that fully explained, but you know, that's basically what it is. And in this fight in particular, she transforms her grandson's body into the same body that Toji Zenin had. Toji is a man who basically flipped the entire Jujutsu world on its head by defeating the two strongest sorcerers in battle and killing the Star Plasma Vessel, basically forcing Tengen, which is like this godlike character, to evolve without a host. And he did it all without having a speck of cursed energy to his name. When I first saw him in action earlier in this season, I didn't think too much of him. I kind of like chalked all of his wins up to him just having no cursed energy, so he was able to just sneak up on people and catch them off guard. And he still ended up dying, so I kind of figured that he had his own limits, you know? It's the same thing that happened with Jogo in my eyes, where like I always thought like Jogo was weak, but this arc shows that he's like immensely strong, and the only reason he kept losing was because he was fighting people who were just unbeatable. So when Toji basically got to show off all of his skills against people who weren't like special grade gods, we got to see just how dangerous this man truly was. The first thing the grandson does in the battle is essentially take Ino out in one punch, and to add insult to injury, he like basically just pulverizes him right afterwards. And let me just tell you, Ino was not like weak or anything. He may seem like that, but he was on the cusp of becoming a grade 1 sorcerer. Like, he was actually pretty strong, and he took him out with one punch, pulverized him, and like, what's even worse is that he might as well have just beat him to death, because we don't see this man for like the rest of the freaking arc, or even the next arc, I think. The grandmother thinks that shit's sweet until she realizes that her grandson lost control, and Toji is the one who's fully in control of his body and is completely aware of his situation and does not want to be taken control by some old hag, and he instantly kills her in like a second. It's not even fair what he does to her. And afterwards, he continues his entire rampage in Shibuya. Meanwhile, Megumi, Nanami, Maki, and Nobito are essentially fighting this disaster curse named Dagon. He opens up his domain expansion super quick into the fight and essentially activates his like sure hit attack. And it's super devastating to all the casted characters, and they realize that they cannot beat him in a fight, and their entire plan is to essentially leave. So Megumi comes up with this entire plan to open a gateway so that they can all just leave all at once, so he can't use the domain expansion anymore. But their one chance of leaving is ruined because someone decides to come right through the portal instead of letting them leave.
The one who had inherited the curse of the Zenin clan from birth, and the one who could not completely cast off that curse. They both stood in witness to the one who left it all behind, now manifested in raw flesh and taking action.
This was the moment where I finally decided to start reading the manga, because the fact that Toji just now appeared, coupled with the fact that Itadori was sitting there, we were left on a cliffhanger with Itadori just sitting there, left to his own devices, made me realize like I could not wait week to week to watch an episode. I just need to read it all at that point, right then and there. Also was the fact that every time I opened Twitter, I kept getting a bunch of spoilers about Gojo versus Sukuna, and like obviously we're nowhere close to that, so I just need to catch up with everyone else. Anyway, this battle is super epic. The choreography from Toji mixed with the fun environment of them fighting on water makes this fight look so satisfying. And Toji looks like a complete monster here, never letting up with any of his attacks, and he's completely overwhelming Dagon. And if he ever does take a moment, it's because he's winding up for an even more brutal and bloody attack. I also want to point out the fact that at this very point, Maki was super interested in this person. She had no idea who he was, but she was outrageously impressed by that there was a person who was essentially stronger with her with no curse energy. And I just really like the little banter that she has, because it basically just foreshadows that she's going to basically at least attempt to reach that level of power in the future. Anyways, it doesn't really take long for him to actually dispose of the disaster curse in the room, and he essentially turns his sights to the next strongest person in the area. And ironically enough, the person who has the most curse energy in the entire room is essentially Megumi. And the reason why that's ironic is because Megumi and Toji are father and son. Well, son and father, you know what I mean. And Toji does not recognize him because right now Toji is a mindless beast who's just operating only on instincts, and Megumi doesn't recognize his father because he was too young to actually recognize who his father even was. And this fight is like so chilling. It feels like Megumi is fighting an unstoppable ghost, and for the majority of the fight he's just running away in the empty night streets of Shibuya, which is like pretty fitting considering the fact this is all happening on Halloween. And the anime adds a little bit more to this battle than the manga, which I think is a super great choice because the changes made are absolutely insane. And in this fight, I almost find myself rooting for Choso because his entire goal seems so noble. And somehow in this moment, Megumi actually is able to land an actual, he's almost able to land an actual fatal blow on Toji, and that snaps him out of his entire wild beast trance that he's in, and he recognizes Megumi for the first time. And he ends up asking Megumi essentially what his name is, and he tells him that his last name is basically Fushiguro, which essentially means that Megumi wasn't sold to the Zenin clan, which basically tells Toji that Megumi actually had a chance at a good life. He wasn't just a slave to the clan that basically ostracized Toji. And that actually was a satisfying answer to him. So he essentially takes the weapon that he had before and stabs himself in the head, killing himself so that he doesn't actually get a chance to kill him and lose control again. And from the way the scene all plays out in the anime, it kind of feels almost, this could be my opinion, but this just what I saw, but it kind of feels like Megumi knew who it was. He obviously didn't know who this person was, but it looks like from the looks on his face that he had this gut feeling that the guy who just now killed himself shouldn't have done that. As if there was this look of concern, Megumi knew that this person was in some way special to him. Again, I don't know if that's actually what the intent of the scene was, but I felt like that was kind of the intent in the anime versus in the manga. And I'm pretty sure this is the last time we'll basically ever see Toji. And now that we have one beast dead in Shibuya, another one rises. Okay, so we need to cut back to essentially what was happening with Itadori. So after Choso has these fake memories and spirals out of control, he kind of just leaves Itadori there, and that's when these two twins come up, Nanako and Ninako, who essentially just want to use Itadori for their own plans. Now here's a little bit of backstory for these two girls if you don't really know who they are. Essentially, when these two girls were just children, they lived in a village that had a bunch of deaths in it, and everyone in the village blamed the deaths on these two little girls. Even though when Gojo was still alive, when he came back and he basically told them, no, I already exterminated the curse that was killing everyone in the village still said, no, it's these two little girls. So they locked them up, they tortured them, beat them, and Gojo didn't like that, and he killed the entire village. He just wiped everyone out, huge massacre, and he took these two little girls under his wing. And because he did such a nice thing for them, they essentially worshipped him. So when they found out that he died and Kenjaku took over his body, they threw a big hissy fit over that, and they essentially have the plan of going to Itadori, feeding him the rest of the fingers, and asking Sukuna to essentially kill Kenjaku for them. But then Jogo shows up essentially after obliterating these three other sorcerers. We'll talk more about that later because that's kind of crazy in itself. And because these two girls are being so disobedient, he just decides to just blast them away. And he decides to feed Sukuna the rest of the fingers so that he can basically ask him for help during the entire Shibuya incident. And unfortunately for everyone in Shibuya, this works, and the King of Curses gains possession over his vessel. And since they essentially helped him regain this body back, he decides to hear them all out on why they all decided to give him the fingers and what they actually wanted from him. He asks the twins what they want first, and they essentially tell him that they want him to kill Kenjaku. And he just kills them instead because he's annoyed at the fact that they think they can just boss him around when all they did was just contribute one finger to him. Then Sukuna goes to Jogo and asks him what he wants, but Jogo just says he doesn't actually want anything from Sukuna. All he wants from Sukuna is that he just wants Sukuna to reign supreme over the world and basically make it so that curses can once again roam the earth like humans. But Jogo does actually suggest that Sukuna should be making a binding vow with Itadori so that he can have infinite control over his body. but Sukuna doesn't really care to do that because he has his own plans on how to take control. Regardless, Sukuna actually takes a liking to Jogo and decides to make a deal with him. If Jogo can just land one hit on him, then he's going to help him just kill every single human in Shibuya, except of course Megami, because he's taken a liking to him too. Jogo accepts these terms, but then immediately gets his ass kicked. Jogo knew that Sukuna was way stronger than him to begin with, but he didn't realize it was to such a large extent to where Jogo couldn't even land a single hit on him. It even gets to the point where Jogo has to like summon this like giant super meteor, which is his like strongest move over freaking the entire like city, and Sukuna treats it like it's absolutely nothing. And he shows just how much of a threat this entire attack isn't to him by simply just like going to Kusakabe and Panda and basically just making them stand still while the meteor is just heading straight towards all of them, because it's not going to affect him. He just says, fuck it, let me just fuck with other people while this giant meteor of death is heading towards everyone, because he's too fast for it and it's just not going to hit him regardless. Also, I just want to say that I absolutely love the whole gimmick with Sukuna, where he essentially, like, every single time he appears in front of someone, they just stop. And it's not because it's his power or anything, it's just because his cursed energy is so large and sinister that it makes people think that if they even breathe in his presence, then they will just simply die. And it makes him seem so much more dangerous. And I just love that entire gimmick with his character. It just really makes him feel as if he has no equal. So Jogo finds out that Sukuna basically dodged his whole attack in just like a split second, which essentially prompts Sukuna to just say, let's just end the battle here and just fight fire with fire. So they both pull out their strongest fire-based attack to see who will come out on top. And the visuals of this scene are actually like really stunning. The entire thing just feels like this giant standoff, and like the craziest part about it is the fact that we don't even get to see them fire off the shot. The scene immediately cuts to Jogo seemingly in the afterlife with Hanami and Dagon. It's a beautiful and somehow hilarious subversion of how you think the scene was supposed to go. Then we see Sukuna basically also come into this place that seems like a crossing to the other side, to the afterlife, and he essentially just goes there to chastise him, basically saying that his plan is like the entire reason for why he's weak, because Jogo essentially wants to have all curses stand together as like humans. But Sukuna thinks that he should have just killed everyone around him if he actually wanted to become genuinely powerful, instead of just huddling together with a bunch of other weaklings. But at the same exact time, he also gives Jogo his respect for actually being one of the strongest people he's ever fought, ironically enough. Even though the entire series we see Jogo get beat up left and right, it's because he's fighting really, really powerful people. Like, he's finally like the strongest people in the entire show and losing to them because, of course, he's not the strongest, but he is pretty strong, so Sukuna actually gives him some respect and tells him to stand proud. It's genuinely the most wholesome we've ever seen Sukuna, and probably ever will see Sukuna in this entire series, and I absolutely love this scene for it. And his words actually make Jogo cry, making him feel a little bit more human, which is of course what he always wanted before the scene just cuts to him being burnt to smithereens, and that's just the end of him. This really wholesome and sad moment also gives a little bit of insight on Sukuna's entire motivation. Here we see that Sukuna, basically him giving his own advice, if he followed it correctly, it basically means that Sukuna basically destroyed everyone around him. He cut everyone he might have ever loved off from him, and everyone who was around him he simply just destroyed to become the strongest. And that actually sounds like a really, really isolating life. It sounds really lonely. Which is why when he finds Jogo, who's also a very strong person, he actually gives him some respect and he acknowledges him. Because even though he's not as strong as him, Jogo isn't as strong as Sukuna, he still recognizes his strength. And because of that, there was an actual connection, even if it was only just an ember of one. The very next moment, we actually see Urame basically pop up right to the side, and for the first time ever, we see Sukuna genuinely excited and happy to see someone. I don't actually have anything to really say about this right now, but I do want to point it out just because it seems very interesting for the future of the series, because they seem like they're actually really good friends. And I think it could give us a peek into Sukuna's entire past. And also it's also interesting because in the same scene, He also tells Urame that it won't be much longer until he's actually free. So it seems like a turning point from this one scene of just seeing this one character. And they don't actually get to talk for very long, because in that very moment, basically Sukuna senses that Megumi's about to kill himself, so he basically books it over to that side of town to see what's going on. When he gets there, he basically has the instinct to save Haruta, and he also sees that Megumi is just bleeding out on the ground in like a suspended state of death. This is the first time that we ever see Sukuna ever actually care for someone else and their well-being and actively try to save someone from dying, which basically tells us that Megumi's entire role in Sukuna's plan is like instrumental and outrageously important. The reason Megumi is basically dying right now is because he summoned his most powerful Shikigami, Mahoraga, and it's like basically out of control, and the only way that you can possibly save the person who summoned it, which is Megumi at the moment, Sukuna's gonna have to just basically kill Mahoraga himself in order to make the entire ritual like completely void in order to save him. And the fight that transpires afterwards is just like complete art. The animators went all out in just making this entire episode feel like an actual movie. From the animation to the choreography to even the music. Listening to the Malevolent Shrine OST in the background made this fight feel as if I was watching two gods fight each other. And the collateral damage actually drove that entire concept home. Hundreds of thousands of lives are just completely lost within this entire battle, and it's barely an afterthought. And I think the only reason Sukuna even took notice of all the lives was just because he knew that Itadori was going to blame himself from the massive loss of life, and he just probably took so much joy in that. Like, this battle, it didn't feel like an actual fight. It felt more like a natural disaster. And the craziest part about it is that this episode could have looked way, way better if MAPPA didn't overwork their staff. This entire section filled me with like a bunch of excitement, but let's move on to the next section that actually filled me with an entirely different emotion. Despair. Alright, so let's rewind just a little bit. After Toji like completely wrecks Dagon and takes Megumi away, Jogo immediately goes to the other three sorcerers who were left behind, and he just basically obliterates them. Like, he burns every single one of them to a complete crisp, which is outrageously jarring seeing how strong this character actually is, because throughout the entire show, he's fighting the strongest characters with like hacks abilities, so we never get to see what he's actually made of. So when he fights people who are just like relatively normal, like actual strong first grade sorcerers, he just destroys them. This one scene made me respect Jogo way more than any other scene throughout the entire series. But he's not the person we're going to be really talking about this section. I just wanted to highlight Jogo a little bit. Anyway, he actually like has a lot of victims in this one scene, and unfortunately, one of his victims are Nanami. We see him walking alone in the underground subways of Shibuya, and half of his body is like burnt to a complete crisp, and he's just walking with one eye gone and the other good eye closed, imagining himself on a beach in Malaysia. Until, of course, he snaps back to reality and sees that he's surrounded by a lot of curses and transfigured humans everywhere. And even though he's faced with like the reality of the situation, he's still basically half daydreaming, thinking about building a house on the beach in Malaysia, basically having time to read all the books he bought but never actually had time to read. All of his thoughts together right now are basically just him thinking about getting back all the time he wasted being a sorcerer. And unfortunately, that's all just a fantasy right now, because he keeps remembering that his mission is to actually go and save Megumi. And he also has no idea what happened to the other Zenin clan members, even though they shared a very similar fate to his own. And he can't focus on anything because he's just so exhausted. And not just from the entire Shibuya incident, but literally from everything, from the beginning to him losing his best friend and him having to do that sucky job and killing curses. Everything he's ever done has made him just super tired, because all he's ever done is waste his life on just things he absolutely hated. So in this one battle, he decides that it's just going to be his final battle. Like, no matter what, no matter if he wins or loses, this is just going to be his final battle, and he's going to either move to Malaysia and have the rest of his life in peace or die. And this entire sequence is outrageously like marvelous, because it just continuously transitions from like the flat, dark colors of the bloody battle all the way to like the bright colors of like the fantasy that's going on in his mind, where it's just him that's him just calm and happy and in bliss. And it's all accompanied by like this beautiful piano in the background that honestly like almost it genuinely made me tear up a little bit as I saw him basically meet his match in this final battle of his. And as soon as we finally see that he's done killing the last of the transfigured humans, that's when we see Mahito pop up. Mahito is the first disaster curse that Nanami's ever actually had to face, and now we see that it's also going to be his last. And Nanami knows it's the end. He sees his old friend Haibara's ghost standing there pointing towards Itadori, who's in the background, also powerless to actually save Nanami because Mahito already put his hand on him. In this moment, Nanami fully gives in. He turns around to see Itadori and he just tells him that he has it from here. And then that's when Mahito just blows him up and Nanami is gone for good, leaving Itadori there traumatized, which actually leads very nicely into the next section I want to talk about. It's at this moment that we actually get to see Itadori let out all of his frustrations, the uselessness of basically seeing his mentor get sealed, seeing the curse inside him destroy millions of lives, and now being absolutely helpless seeing his mentor Nanami just blow up right in front of him. It all culminates right in this battle to where we actually see Itadori go all out. The only thing that's actually holding him back is all the transfigured humans that Mahito's throwing at him. Even though they're already like way too far gone, Itadori still holds back against them because they're still humans, even if they're monsters and they practically want to die at this point because they're too far gone. He's still too nice of a person to actually want to hurt them. Itadori asks Mahito how he can just continuously keep playing with people's lives, but all Mahito says is that basically Mahito is Itadori and Itadori is Mahito. And before he can really like explain what that means, we get like a huge slew of like anime only fight sequences that are like outrageously entertaining. In this episode, we also figure out that basically Mahito split himself into like two different beings, and one of them is fighting Itadori and the other is fighting Nobara. And in the middle of this fight, basically Mahito comes up with a plan to essentially just go and kill Nobara and drag her dead body to Itadori to break his spirit even further. But obviously it's not going to just work that easily because Nobara is the main character. They're not just going to kill her off just so easily. I'm not gonna lie, I genuinely screamed when I saw this scene. It hurt a lot to see a character that had so much potential just get ripped away from us so soon. And half the episode basically tells us about her backstory again and shows us why she's always been so bitter. And it shows us all the friends that basically she was separated from. But it also reminds us that she's made a bunch of new friends along the way. It reminds us specifically of all the fun she's actually had throughout this entire journey. So much so that her last words to Itadori are simply just to tell everyone that life wasn't so bad. And after that beautiful send-off, we're just left with this grotesque husk of a body. It's at this point that Mahito's plan actually works. He succeeds in breaking Itadori, and then he proceeds to just physically break Itadori by beating the living crap out of him. And then he actually finally elaborates on the statement that he said before. He makes Itadori realize that his entire fantasy of basically killing all of these monsters and saving all of his friends was just a fairy tale. This was an actual war of ideals. Mahito believes himself and Itadori are just one and the same. Just as Itadori saves people without a second thought, Mahito kills people without a second thought. They're perfect mirror opposites of each other. This is simply just a fight between human reasoning and basic animal instincts, and which one of those ideals are going to be left standing 1,000 years from now. But Mahito is basically preaching this to no one because Itadori just lost his entire will to live already. So once Mahito realizes this, he just decides to finish him off. And as he takes his finishing swing, it doesn't quite land. The bells of the Gion Monastery in India echo with the warning that all things are impermanent. The blossoms of the salad tree teach us through their hues that what flourishes must fade. However, sorcerers like us are the exception. Todo finally arrives in Shibuya, and this is basically the speech he gives Itadori in order to get his spirits back up. As Itadori is just laying on the ground crying because his friends died, Todo reminds him that he's not allowed to just sit there and give up just because his friends died. In fact, their deaths is the reason why they should keep going on. Their deaths should drive them because their will should live on in their living friend's soul. And that's simply just a curse that every Jujutsu sorcerer must endure. Then after listening to an awesome remix of Boogie Woogie, Itadori basically finally gets up realizing that he was just using the deaths of his friends as an excuse to just quit, when that was just completely unfair to them from how far and how hard all of his friends fought to get to where they are, for him to just quit just because they died. So he was basically going to get up and make sure that he took on the burden of their suffering. And the rest of this fight is just, of course, amazing. We get like a bunch of more anime-only scenes. There's also this one scene where like we see that he's like that Todo's having this like inner monologue, and like then there's like flashes of his face when he's about to like throw this like cool attack. And I didn't notice this is my first time watching it. When I watched it again, I realized that like it's like the images from like this one manga chapter page that like have this like goofy picture of him. And when I saw it and I realized that they added that into this one scene, it made me giggle so hard. I love the little Easter eggs. I love all the little animation quirks. I love everything about this battle. Then once they actually reach 120% of their actual full power, that's when the real battle genuinely begins. There's obviously like a lot more to talk about, but my critiques would simply just be the animation was out of this world, the choreography is great, what else? There's a really awesome cliffhanger. Oh, and some really awesome, well-deserved character beatdowns. But besides that, I don't have too much to actually add to it, so I'm just gonna end the video here. And if you're one of the people who like basically watch this regardless of the spoilers or whatever without ever seeing it, just watch the damn show. Just watch the ending. It's really good. It's like basically 10 out of 10. I love it so much. Oh, and probably just from like the way I'm gonna like edit this whole video, it's probably not gonna be able to get monetization. So if you want to support me, then you should check out my book, Spirit Caster Winter's War. Pretty cool. You don't even have to buy it. Just check it out. Just if you want to like support me, because this video is not going to make any money. It's also filled with a pretty action-packed story filled with adventure and magic and whatnot. So if you're into that stuff, then yeah. See ya.